We're extremely excited to announce our newest integration with QuickBooks Online version. So just want to stress the online part there. So again, we're very excited to announce that today. The point of today's webinar is to kind of cover the integration from an authorization standpoint and a sync standpoint, how that integrates with QuickBooks Online versions. And then at the end, we'll answer a couple questions. Feel free to write your questions kind of along the way in the question box there. We'll try to get to as many of them at the end of the webinar today. And we'll also talk about our early access program and how you can participate in that and get early access to the QuickBooks Online integration. So again, we're going to go ahead and get started. First, I'm going to start from the TMS or the Easy Facility software side and authorizing your account, and then showing some kind of billing items within TMS and how that looks and syncs over to your QuickBooks Online account. All right, first I'm showing my screen. If I could also maybe just get another round of yeses if you can see my screen. Just want to make sure that everyone can see the screen. You should be seeing the Easy Facility QuickBooks Online page. All right, looks like everyone can see the screen here. So now we will officially get started. So one of the pages that the page I'm showing here is our newest QuickBooks Online page. This can be accessed from the administration tab once you've logged into your account. This will require a permission to access this page. We can talk about that as well, or answer any questions around how to set that up if you're unfamiliar with permissions. But for those of you that will have the permission, you should have access to this QuickBooks Online page. So I've already authorized our test QuickBooks account here. Basically, what this is going to ask you for when you're authorizing or the first time you're hitting this page, you're going to click an authorize button there. And that's going to open a pop-up window that's going to ask for your QuickBooks credentials, so your username and password. Once you've entered those credentials, it's going to present you with your QuickBooks companies that you can select, and then authorize that company to sync with Easy Facility. Once that process is completed, it should look something like this. So you'll kind of see the status of that authorization and whether or not your account has been authorized. And then you have an option below that to run the sync automatically. So by checking this box, by default, it will run the sync daily or very early in the morning every day. Or you can go with the Run Sync Now button. Automatically needs to be unchecked in order to run the sync manually. But this can be at kind of your leisure. So whenever you decide you'd like to run the sync, you have that option to do so manually if you're not running it automatically. And at the bottom is the reauthorize. So if any reason you need to reauthorize your account, simply clicking that button will reprompt you to enter your credentials and selecting your QuickBooks company, whether it be a new one you want to associate or authorize to, or an existing one, again, for whatever reason you may need to reauthorize your account. All right, so this is very straightforward, very simple setup here. Again, as long as you have your QuickBooks credentials, you should have no problems getting this authorized. Once that's been authorized, the syncing will begin once you start completing transactions. So the information that will be synced is customer data, invoice data, payment data, along with things such as taxes and so on and so forth. So all of that information will be synced into your QuickBooks account. So to kind of just give you a general idea, again, this is going to be kind of more of a short and quick example. So we're really looking forward to some of those questions. If you have them, again, just a reminder, you can type those into the question box. So let's say, for example, you sell a membership to one of your clients. I'm just going to switch over to this tab here. We sold a kind of a 3-month membership with an initiation fee to Bob Smith. So for those of you familiar with the invoices in Easy Facility and the breakdown, you should already be familiar with viewing this page. So just kind of showing the comparison of how that data looks once it's been synced over to your QuickBooks Online account. So this is just listing out those individual items on a single invoice. And at the bottom, we have a payment of $200 that was associated to this invoice. All right, so very simple, very straightforward in terms of Easy Facility. There should be no change to your day-to-day. Everything will happen automatically and behind the scenes. But again, you can go in and manually sync those your QuickBooks account if you decided to do so, instead of waiting for that automatic run to happen. Once it does get synced over to QuickBooks, I'm just going to click over into our test account here with QuickBooks. I've clicked into the Sales tab here. I'm just in viewing all sales. At the bottom here, we'll see Bob Smith. We can see that he has a payment and an invoice. If we clicked into the payment, for example, we should see that amount that is linked to that invoice. So we'll see here it's linked to invoice number 5. This is the invoiced amount. And then at the bottom, we'll see that $200 payment that was submitted and synced over to QuickBooks. Now I'm going to go ahead and click into invoice number 5. So what this is going to do is just give us a breakdown. Some of you may already be familiar with QuickBooks Online. If you are, then you've probably seen this page before. But what it's showing us here is just a breakdown of those same items that we saw in Easy Facility. So we can see that initiation fee as well as those 3 items, as well as those 3 other items. And then we see the amounts. We can see that they were taxable items. And if we take a look below, we'll see our subtotal. We applied a discount just to show you how that also works. So you can see that discount gets carried over as well, showing the deduction, what your sales tax are, and then giving you that total and what balance is due. So again, this is how that information gets synced over to QuickBooks Online. As I mentioned, the top things that are being synced is customer information, invoicing, and payments. Those are basically the top 3 things that get synced. But as you can see, taxes and things like that will be synced into the QuickBooks Online account as well. I'm just going to close that out. We will also carry over the tax information just so that information has made its way over to QuickBooks for future reference, as well as seeing that kind of breakdown, and obviously for reporting purposes on the QuickBooks side. So this kind of gives you that breakdown of the information that we just synced regarding taxes. I'm clicking back into sales. So again, very, very straightforward integration. We tried to keep it as seamless as possible. Tried to eliminate the extra actions from your side and just ensuring that pretty much majority, if not everything, happens automatically. Again, reducing the amount of steps that you need to take on your side. And using QuickBooks what it was designed for. So that's was our ultimate goal. But obviously, as with any other early access program that we've hosted in the past, we're looking for that feedback. We're looking for those questions on how we make this better, how do we improve it before we go fully functional into our production environment. So again, the goal of today's webinar was to kind of just inform everyone of this integration, as well as announcing the start of the early access program for the QuickBooks Online integration. So with that being said, again, this is an extremely short webinar in terms of what I'm showing you today, because the integration is simple, and that's what we wanted to, the way we wanted to design that to happen. However, as with any feature that we introduce, we make changes based on feedback. You guys are the experts, so we're looking for that feedback to expand on this integration, to make it better, and again, to make it more user-friendly in regards to how you need to use this integration. So with all of that being said, I think I'm going to go ahead and just kind of jump right into some questions here, and hopefully that will steer the remainder of this webinar here. So just give me 1 second to kind of pull up the list of questions. So one of the first questions is just regarding some concerns around payment syncing and how that information makes its way over to QuickBooks. So we've definitely tried our best to work out all of the kinks that we've had or experienced with the desktop integration. So far, we've seen a much smoother integration and how data is being synced. If there are any noticeable issues or concerns with how the new way would sync compared to what you're used to in the desktop version, again, we would really appreciate the feedback so we can jump on correcting those issues, or again, making improvements to this integration overall. So just wanted to point that out, just for those of you who are using the desktop version and have some concerns with the integration. Again, this is by far a much tighter and more seamless integration. So I'm just going to read through the next couple questions here. We got some long ones, so just give me 1 second to read through those. All right, so the next question I believe is regarding those of you who have an existing QuickBooks Online account and have already inputted data, let's say, for example, manually into QuickBooks, and that could be data coming from Easy Facility. And if that data is from Easy Facility and being manually inputted, the question is basically asking, should they delete everything and then resync the Easy Facility data over? If the data is in fact Easy Facilities data that you've manually inputted, I would recommend deleting the data and then resyncing your account. The other suggestion, if there are concerns with deleting the data, is maybe starting a new company and having the automatic sync or this integration sync to that new company, so that historical data that you've manually inputted remains into a separate company. Again, if it is in fact Easy Data, that new initiated sync when you first set up your account should be pulling in that historical data. So you can have that information added to your new company, or you could again delete out the information that you've already manually inserted into QuickBooks if it is in fact all Easy Data. If you do have data that you've been adding to your QuickBooks Online account that is outside of the Easy Facility software, then I probably would recommend the route of starting a new company. And by company, that doesn't mean you need an entirely new QuickBooks account and you have to pay another subscription fee. You are allowed to have multiple companies within one QuickBooks account. So I would recommend maybe taking that route when you want to kind of retain non-Easy Data that you've been manually adding to your QuickBooks account, so there's no conflicts with when you do your initial sync on the QuickBooks setup. All right, so we're just going to go down to the next question here. All right, next question is asking, can we export to a specific product service that we define in our existing chart of accounts? So I'm not 100% if the question is regarding Easy Facility or QuickBooks and exporting from QuickBooks or Easy Facility. If it's regarding Easy Facility, yes, you can export data such as products and services if it's around the billing information that you want to import into QuickBooks. But I do believe the question may be in regards to QuickBooks itself and the products and services. So I would probably check from the QuickBooks side. We can assist you with, how to export. I would also recommend maybe contacting QuickBooks support if you have any concerns or issues with how to export that data from QuickBooks. So there's a products and service tab here. I would imagine there's some exporting functions over here. There's some printing functions if this is in fact the page that you are referencing in your question. So I'm going to move on to the next question. Just going back to that, if that did not answer your question, Nathan, feel free to kind of elaborate or expand on your question in another question in here. If we don't get to it by the end of today's webinar, obviously we'll get back to you, each one of you individually, on the answers to your questions. So next question, good question, is does the early access program cost money? So the early access program that we offer from our side costs you nothing. We offer that free to our clients. It's just your feedback. That's all we're looking for. There's no fees or hidden costs or anything like that in terms of our early access program. With that being said, it will require that you have a QuickBooks account in order to kind of test out the sync and the data. From my understanding, QuickBooks is and can be willing to work with you if you do want to kind of delete out the data if you're doing it for testing purposes. We're also, as you can see here, using a sandbox account. There's a possibility of doing that as well, setting up kind of a sandbox or test QuickBooks account for testing purposes during the early access program. So again, from our side, we charge you nothing to participate in the early access program. I'll share that URL with you guys at the end of today's webinar. We'll also follow up with each and every one of you in an email that will include that early access link. Next question is, does POS integrate? So the answer to that is yes. Basically, any and all transactions that happen within the Easy Facility software, whether it be a POS sale, a membership sale, a package or rental, anything that's basically, self-service, anywhere that a transaction gets created will be synced into QuickBooks. So yes, the point of sale is also integrated in terms of the billing information and customer data that gets synced. Next question is, QuickBooks is linked to our bank accounts. I don't know if that is a yes on that question. All we're doing is syncing to your QuickBooks account. If your bank account is synced to QuickBooks, that sync or that integration is on the QuickBooks side. All we're doing is connecting to your QuickBooks account itself. So if kind of the purpose of that question is whether or not you're doing any automatic ACH transfers and things like that, that connection would have to be on the QuickBooks side itself. So we don't kind of integrate QuickBooks and your bank accounts together. that would be done on the QuickBooks side. Obviously, if you have a processor integrated with us for processing payments and things of that nature, that is directly integrated with us. But in terms of your bank account being associated, that would be handled on the QuickBooks side. All right, next question here is, I believe, related specifically to Easy Facility or the TMS software, which is how can you add tax through TMS software without manually adding it to invoice? So the way to avoid having to manually add taxes to each one of your invoice is to use revenue categories. When you create your taxes, you can assign taxes to revenue categories or not, for that matter, if things are tax exempt. So we highly encourage the use of revenue categories. There's a slew of benefits when using revenue categories, from just reporting down to the way that taxes get applied or not applied to billing items that are associated to invoices. Just a quick reference there, the taxes are created in the administration page. From here, you want to go to billing administration, and then you have your taxes. Again, you can create those taxes here. Once you've created those taxes, you can then start assigning those to revenue categories. So as long as your items within TMS are being associated to revenue categories, all of that should update automatically, so you don't have to go through each individual invoice, for that matter, and add taxes or apply taxes. Keep in mind that in certain scenarios, if you're adding taxes later, you may open a balance. So if that invoice has been fully paid and then you apply tax later, that's probably going to increase the balance. Therefore, the client will owe whatever that remaining balance is now that you've tacked on taxes later. So just keep that in mind if you decide to set up your taxes after collecting payments. All right, so the next question is a good one. It says, asked, do you have to set up products and services in QuickBooks or Easy Facility to sync it up? So if you're looking at the screen here, I've clicked into that products and services tab. So as you can see, we sync that information over automatically for you, so you don't have to enter that information on the QuickBooks side. So that's all going to get created based on those kind of products and services that you offer in TMS. So again, you don't have to kind of duplicate your efforts there. All of that information will be synced from the TMS side. All right, we're going into the next question here. I think this is a duplicate of the last question, which is setting up items or products and services, for example, in both QuickBooks and Easy. Again, no, you only need to set them in Easy, and that information gets synced over, as you can see here below. All right, we're reading the next question here. So the next question is, when will this be accessible? So just as a reminder, we're going through our early access program as we do with any of our major features or changes that we make to the software. So it's technically available now, but in our early access program. So we need to start with our registrations for that. Just a reminder that not everyone gets selected for the early access program, but we do try to work with as many people as possible during this early access program. Once we get those registrations flowing in, we'll start going through those different accounts and working with each one of you to get set up in our sandbox environment, and then working our way towards your live account to start testing data that way. All right, we're just reading through the next question here. So if you are making changes such as voiding or deleting billed items or invoices and things of that nature out of QuickBooks, that information is not making its way back to Easy Facility. So you do want to make sure that you handle those changes in TMS. So if you do need to void a billing item, if you need to void an invoice or anything along those lines, make sure that you do that from the Easy Facility side to ensure that gets carried back over to QuickBooks. So it is more of kind of a one-way sync from Easy to QuickBooks, not QuickBooks to Easy. So the next question is asking for companies like mine who have multiple profit centers, such as gym, personal training, large group, etc. Will this download into the proper QB class profit center? So we are working towards adding the class or classifications during the sync. So we currently don't have that set up for the early access program. However, we are going to be working on that. So when it does go live and into production as a final launch, that will be available, and therefore it will be syncing to your classes, as well as syncing kind of your revenue categories over as classes and so on and so forth. So we'll offer a couple different preferences and options on how we control that. But again, we will be offering that prior to the production launch. During early access program, you wouldn't see it in the initial phase, but as we start to expand on that based on this feedback, you should see it in your early access before going live to give that a test. All right, so the next question is a good one. It basically asks, how far back does the sync go or cover? So it can go as far back as we want to set a date range for. So if you need all of your historical data to be synced into QuickBooks, we can do it. Keep in mind that if you do have a lot of data, that could take some time to sync over. So if you don't need to go back, from the very beginning of time in terms of your information or data, we wouldn't recommend it, but we can do that if you would like to. It just may take a little bit longer than some of the other syncs that don't have as much data. So keep that in mind. We can go back as far as you need when we sync the data. All right, next question asks, how would voided transactions be handled? So again, if you void that transaction in Easy Facility, so in the software side, it will be synced to QuickBooks. So it'll take care of that, and it'll update that information in QuickBooks. And reversals too, to point that out. So as you know, that voids and reversals are two different things in the system, both of which will be handled in QuickBooks as long as you're taking care of that from the Easy Facility side. All right, next question is also a good question. So it sounds like so we have QuickBooks, but not the online version. Is this something that will still work through our server? So if you don't have the online version, it will not work with this integration. Some of you may be aware that we do have a desktop version. However, it is kind of our legacy integration. We were highly encouraged by QuickBooks to pursue the online integration, as they are kind of pushing really hard on their online products. So that's why we decided to pursue this integration. From our understanding, working with QuickBooks, they can migrate your desktop version to an online version. According to them, it's a pretty seamless process. Once that happens, it's just a matter of you authorizing that account in the Easy Facility. But as of right now, that if you do have a server version or an installed version, it will not work with the online integration. So if you're interested in knowing more, feel free to reach out to us via our support channel, and we can talk with you in terms of what your options are and how we can proceed from there. All right, so I'm going to try and cover these next two questions together. The first one is regarding the point of sale system and their online registration, and does that integrate into QuickBooks? So the answer to both of those is yes. The point of sale system and the online registration system will integrate. So again, just as a reminder, it's basically any transactional data. So any transactions that happen in Easy Facility, whether it be the POS, online registration, self-service, so on and so forth, all of that information gets synced over. And then the kind of second question is, does it create an individual invoice for each transaction? So the answer to that is yes. In QuickBooks, you have control in TMS how you create those invoices. In QuickBooks, it creates that. As we saw, we had that single invoice with multiple items listed on it for that membership. In TMS, we saw the same in QuickBooks, where it was one invoice with multiple items listed in QuickBooks. Yeah, so whatever you see in Easy Facility in that invoice tab. So if there was one item here, you'll see an invoice in QuickBooks with one item. If there's 5 items like we see here today, you'll see one invoice with 5 items. So again, 4 items, sorry. Again, I was looking at the invoice number, excuse me. So again, whatever you see in TMS is what you will see in QuickBooks in terms of the invoice. So again, if you have one invoice with multiple items, that's how it will appear in QuickBooks. If you decided to go with multiple invoices with a single item on each one, that's how it gets created in QuickBooks. When will this go live? A bit more about our early access program, again, just for those of you that may not be familiar with it. So when we do launch, a major feature or a big change within the software, we like to kind of roll it out in phases, to ensure that we're collecting the necessary feedback from our customers and that we're making the necessary changes based on your feedback. Again, you guys are the experts, so we want to take that feedback and try to make it make this feature as best as possible. So with that being said, just some rough timelines. We generally kind of like to do our early access program. You know, at a minimum, we try to do about 4 weeks. You know, depending on how much feedback we're getting, it could be a little bit shorter, it could be longer. Once that early access program has been completed and the changes have been made based on that feedback, we'll roll out what we call an opt-in. Some of you may be familiar with that. When you're accessing that administration page, you'll get a pop-up that kind of alerts you of a new feature that we're offering, allowing you to opt in. So you could wait to opt in later, you can do it now, and get kind of that early access from a live production perspective. And that generally will run for maybe close to the same time as we do the early access, just because that gives us a whole new round of feedback that we may not have gotten from those that participated in the early access program. And then after that is completed, then we kind of launch it live to everyone. Again, those are very rough timelines. Occasionally we find ourselves going a little bit longer to ensure that we make the necessary changes. Our self-service, new self-service portal is an example. We're kind of finalizing that and should be pushing it on the remainder of our clients here soon. So if you're not using that new self-service portal, be on the lookout for some communication emails about that switch over soon enough. But just kind of wanted to highlight our process and how we go about introducing new features. So I'm just going to read through the next question here. Just give me 1 second. All right, sorry about that. So the next question asks probably what everyone's thinking, and how much will it cost? Just to be clear, QuickBooks does have their own set of monthly fees, so you may want to reach out to them in terms of what their costs are. We do charge an integration fee. That's right now starting at about $50 a month. So that's what Easy will be charging in terms of a cost from our end. But again, for QuickBooks cost, you'll want to reach out to them to find out. All right, so the next question asks about kind of outstanding invoices or balances and making payments through QuickBooks. So keep in mind that if anything is done through the QuickBooks side, it's not going to sync back to Easy. So if you do in fact make the payment via QuickBooks, that payment is not going back into Easy. So you'll want to ensure that those payments are being made in Easy Facility on the TMS side. With that being said, if the client decides to go into the self-service portal and make a payment, yes, that will be synced to QuickBooks. Self-service being the Easy Facility self-service portal. I don't know if QuickBooks offers a self-service portal for your customers to go to submit payments, but if they do, and that is in fact where they are applying those payments, it will not make its way back into Easy. So remember to do those payments, collect those payments from the Easy side, whether it be from self-service, online registration, and so on. So the next question, they asked about the example that I had shown there, and it asked, does a customer need to be tied to a transaction in order for it to be recorded in QuickBooks? So by definition, in Easy Facility, all transactions have to be tied to someone, right? The only, I guess, special case that may apply to would be the point of sale, where you're not associating it to a customer. However, it's technically being associated to what's called a point of sale customer, so kind of this guest customer. So even then, it's still technically being tied to a customer. So therefore, in the Easy Facility side, every transaction is being tied to a customer. Whether or not QuickBooks requires that on their side may not be the case, but the way Easy Facility works is that everything is tied to some kind of customer that then will be synced over to QuickBooks. Next question asks, will we have full charting ability in conjunction with other departments, example leagues, plus, and tavern? So if that's regarding the QuickBooks side, there are many different reports in QuickBooks. I'm sure if your data is being organized properly, you should be able to report on those differences, such as your leagues or taverns. And there are certain reports in Easy that could also help you with that data. But if you're referring to QuickBooks specifically, they do have reporting to break down by those different categories. and Easy Facility offers that as well. For example, and I'm going to go back to the revenue categories and the importance of that. So running your revenue report, you can kind of filter by revenue category. So if you're setting them up to be leagues or taverns or POS items and things like that, there's Reporting in Easy that can help you drill down on those specific items. Okay, so the next question is asking about, I believe, if dealing with payment schedules in Easy and how does that sync into QuickBooks. So one invoice of 12, it says 12 invoices, but I'm wondering if that's 12 payments. If one invoice, will it then show up on my AR schedule so future payments can be applied to it? So let me see if I can explain this without getting too technical. Basically, if you have a payment schedule on a single invoice, it's taking the earliest payment that's due and syncing that into QuickBooks. And that will continue to update as the due dates come around. So hopefully that wasn't too confusing. That question was from Matt. So if you'd like maybe for us to expand on that question, just let me know. I'll be happy to reach out to you and we can kind of go over that specifically and how that works. You know, and if you end up being a part of the early access program, you know, testing that out and providing us with feedback on how that works would be great for us as well. But again, if you would like to kind of have us expand on that question, just let me know. I'll be glad to work with you. Next question was asking again about the QuickBooks desktop. So this integration specifically is for the online version of QuickBooks. Again, we were highly encouraged to take this route and kind of starting this integration. It's been a demand from our customers as well as QuickBooks. Again, they're really pushing for their online products. And so we decided this was the route that we take. And just also, as I mentioned before, QuickBooks is willing to migrate your desktop version to an online account. And once that happens, it's just a matter of authorizing that in your TMS account. So if you need any assistance with working with QuickBooks and kind of making that migration happen, just let us know. We'll do our best to kind of walk you through that and work with you in QuickBooks if we need to. So again, reach out to us if you need any help with that. Next question is also asked about the desktop version in comparison to the online, and is it more synchronized? So I would say yes. We did a lot of enhancements to it. A lot of the data may seem similar in terms of what the desktop version syncs. The biggest difference, though, is the integration is much more seamless. It's much more faster, and it's less work from your side in terms of kind of what you need to do to set it up and how you manage it. So again, and if we're taking this feedback and we're making the necessary changes to it, then ideally it's 100%, 100 times better, I should say, than a desktop integration. So just keep that in mind when you're trying to compare the two. So perfect opportunity for those of you that are using the desktop version to trial the online integration. So I would encourage you to register for our early access program if you're a desktop user. That's one of the options when you're filling out the form. So definitely make sure you select desktop. We'll be ensuring that we work with enough of our desktop users to make sure that process is as seamless as possible from the migration to the authorization and Easy Facility if you're coming from desktop to online. So the next question asks about being retroactively, so getting your data from the past, right? So when we set it up, as I mentioned before, we can kind of specify a date of how far back we want to sync your data. So during that process, we'll kind of work with you and asking or understanding how far back you want your data to sync. So that's something that we can set for you when you're creating your account with us. Next question is also around kind of doing things in QuickBooks and will it sync. So I know I've kind of said it a couple times, but I just want to make sure I stress that the information is a one-way sync from Easy to QuickBooks. So keep in mind that you'll want to make those changes in Easy Facility in order to have them sync into QuickBooks. It will not work the other way around if you start making those changes into QuickBooks. Just reading through the other questions, 1 second. So this next question asks, will each transaction in a batch drop in separately? Do they drop in as payments only? Can they be dropped in as sales receipts or directly into a bank deposit window? If that question is regarding to how an Easy Facility handles those transactions, in terms of the integration, the way that it's been currently working for you today, that is not going to change. Even the way that it syncs into QuickBooks. So basically, once those payments have been submitted, approved, and applied, that information gets synced over to QuickBooks. So that batch will need to have completed in order for it to be synced into QuickBooks. So it's not going to sync it as a batch, it's syncing it as individual transactions and payments into QuickBooks. How it gets handled on the Easy side may be batching those payments, but again, how it gets synced will be done more from an individual transaction level and payment level, not as a batch. All right, next question, just kind of reiterating around it, this integration only working with the QuickBooks Online version, and kind of asking what accommodations will be made when the updates or yearly upgrades occur. So again, in terms of our software, if we are making updates or upgrades that will impact this integration or the sync, we'll ensure that we make those changes so we're not kind of breaking that connection or breaking those sync, and that data gets properly synced over. If this is regarding any updates or upgrades from the QuickBooks side, we'll obviously be notified of those changes from QuickBooks, so we'll ensure that we are also making those upgraded changes to our connection with QuickBooks or to the integration that we have. So, obviously, any change that we make that will impact QuickBooks, we'll make sure that we stay on top of and get those changes out to ensure nothing breaks in your connection. Reading through the next couple questions here. So getting close to the end of the webinar. Not sure if we'll be able to get to all of the questions, but we'll try our best to get through the next few here. So I'm just reading through those now. We got another question about kind of deleting data if you already have entered data. I know some of you may have been entering data into your QuickBooks account for many years now. So I am in no way suggesting that you have to delete that data, which is why I would encourage creating a new company, right? So you keep that historical data intact. It doesn't get touched. It will not change from the sync, but instead you sync that information moving forward. We could also work with QuickBooks on any suggestions that they may have in terms of how we should sync data with any historical data you may have been entering in QuickBooks yourself. So again, I would not be too concerned with deleting. There are some other alternatives if you're concerned with deleting your data from QuickBooks. This question was from a user who said they currently do not have QuickBooks Online, but is considering getting one, and they mentioned they didn't see the QuickBooks option under the admin section. So as a reminder, no one will see that option today. You'll need to register for the early access program. If you've been selected to participate, we'll get you set up, and after that point you should see the QuickBooks Online option in the administration page. Going to read through, probably going to cover maybe 1 or 2 more questions, but that should not stop you from submitting questions. We will go through these after the webinar, answer those and send them back to you. We do have your information here. So again, we will get back to you. So for those of you who want to just submit those last minute questions, feel free to do so. We may not be able to answer them right now, but we will get back to you with those answers. The next question asks about if we opt to manually sync, can you designate specific transactions or date periods? So we can specify the date period of when you would like to begin those transactions to be synced. Right now that's handled from our side, so we would input that date for you. However, we will be making it into the product so you can enter those dates manually. And as far as specific transactions, right now it's basically syncing all transactions. We do plan to expand on that and kind of giving you control of whether or not you want to sync more of a summary based on, let's say, your revenue category. So instead of each individual transaction being synced, you're doing more of a global summary sync. So, you know, if you're dealing with leagues, you can just sync your league revenue category totals and your subcategories of that instead of each individual line item or transaction. So that is something that we will be working towards to allow you to kind of customize what information and how it gets synced into QuickBooks. And we're going to take one more question here, and then we will wrap up today's webinar. But again, we will answer all of these questions via email and send them back to you. All right, so our last question asks about kind of the number of transactions. So in this case, they ask if you have 100 POS purchases in a day, do they all show up separately as a POS customer invoice? So if you had 100 transactions in a day, they are being synced individually. So you'll see 100 different transactions in your QuickBooks online account. So keep that in mind that, again, they are individually synced, but it will be under, if you are using the POS customer and you're not linking them to an actual customer in QuickBooks, it will be linked to the POS customer in QuickBooks, but they are individually listed as transactions. So again, if you do have 100, it will list as 100 transactions. So again, that is going to be our last question for today. We are going to email that link out to everyone on how to register for our early access program. If you still have the original email informing you about today's webinar, feel free to reference that. It should have the link in there as well to register, but we'll get in touch with all of the attendees today, or all the registrants that registered for today's webinar. We'll be putting, this webinar is being recorded, so we'll be also putting that up in our support portal as well as sending that out. So be on the lookout for that. Again, we encourage everyone to register for the early access program. We're going to try and work with as many of you as possible, but not everyone will be selected to become an early access user. But the more registrants we get, the better for our early access program, as we would like to try to work with as many of you as possible. Again, no fees, no cost for early access program. The only thing that it's going to cost you is your feedback. So again, in exchange for us giving you early access, all we're asking for is your feedback. So thank you for joining today's webinar. Hope you guys are excited as we are. We'll be in touch soon to answer the remaining questions, as well as how to register for that early access if you don't have that link on hand. Thanks everyone, and have a great day.